Good afternoon, class. Welcome in. Good morning. Good morning. My name is John, and I just want to go ahead and produce to you some of the information through my recent PowerPoint, which was just a comparison between French and U.S. healthcare structures. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to briefly go over that PowerPoint with you. So we'll go ahead and we'll just pop right into it. As far as agenda, what are we trying to establish? I would say the first thing is the purpose. So why does it matter that we're going through this? What is the purpose of comparing the two? What system does the French government use, specifically in regards to healthcare? What system does the United States use? As far as the strengths, what are the strengths of the American system? What are the strengths of the French system? And then we'll go ahead and go into weaknesses of both. We'll go ahead, we'll conclude with a so what, or why does this matter, why is it imperative for us to know, and we'll go ahead and we'll carry on from there. So the biggest thing is our purpose. Why are we going over this? Why am I presenting this info to you? Good question. Comparing national healthcare systems is imperative because in order to progress, we need to study. We need to know the current conditions. We need to know where we're lacking so that we can take that next progress step forward. So basically what I want to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and hop right into the French infrastructure, and we'll go right from there. So what system do the French use? So they are pretty much collectively called a universal healthcare system. Basically, the government pays for the healthcare expenditures through taxation. So a large percentage of the total healthcare cost comes from payroll taxation and income tax. So they're taxed at a higher rate, which then compensates for the healthcare costs. And then there's also a private sector, but it's nowhere nearly as large as that private sector in the United States. As far as the private sector, it covers areas considered non-essential. Most French carry a secondary insurance, but they carry it through their job. So it's, most, I believe the statistic was 80%, but they carry it through their jobs. As far as other forms of that health infrastructure, the education portion is actually pretty interesting because medical school is actually free in France. Basically what happens is the Ministry of Health, which is the equivalent to the United States' healthcare foundations that regulate, basically puts out in the beginning of the year how many health professionals will be trained that year. The medical school is free to the physicians and the specialists. However, they don't get paid nearly as much as U.S. physicians do. They also don't pay malpractice insurance as United States physicians do. Some even receive tax breaks for for complying with government pricing. So we'll go ahead, we'll move right on. What does the United States use as far as a system? We're more of a hybrid system because we have a combination of both private and public funding. The federal government acts as a mediator between everything, but we do have a much larger, predominantly private controlled sector. And I think the biggest reason for that is because we do run the most clinical testing of any country on earth. So the private sector has been huge in experimentals and so on. As far as clinicals go, obviously, when you have more experimentation, when you have newer products, prices rise, which is why America is considered so expensive. We spend more per capita than any other nation on earth. Federal government provides some of the funding. State government provides some of the funding. The state governments are allowed to add their provisions to federals. As far as the strengths of the American system, we have a very competitive private sector. As mentioned before, we have a for-profit sector which drives the innovation, which we were talking about the experimentals and so on. customizable insurance packaging. I would say more so in the US than France. We go out every year, open enrollment. We select a package which suits our lifestyle. And that package lasts for a full fiscal year, and then the following year we have to do the same thing. But each year you're allowed to customize the package that best suits to you. Better access to newer technology. That's just predominantly, again, because we are running the most clinical testing. And we also have a very, very competitive field as far as medical because of the institutions that we have in the United States, how highly ranked we are. As far as the French system, I would say the biggest thing is the people before profit ideology. I think the whole reason their structure is the way it is because they want people to get in the door and receive the healthcare they need without being afraid of the financial implications. Comfort with your physician. In France, you're allowed to see quite a few physicians before you actually decide who you want to permanently see. And that's more, again, to influence people directly getting medical advice to, I would say, prevent only addressing issues at the end stage of care. Much lower administration costs. I would say that's a huge one because, again, the U.S. has a huge private sector. In addition to that, our healthcare administration costs are much higher. We actually spend 20% more on administration costs than France does. No copays. And then the Ministry of Health, which is huge. Ministry of Health basically regulates the amount of incoming physicians, the amount of, or which technologies will be used in the upcoming years. And they also regulate medication pricing, which is huge to both the consumers and the physicians. It keeps everyone in a fair position to operate. Weaknesses of the French system, I would say poor service due to the higher healthcare demand. The more people that need care, the more healthcare professionals we're going to need, and we won't always be able to sustain that. So that may be an issue we're going to see, and it is an issue that they're seeing at this point in time. Lack of preventative care due to essential demand, I would say that's another one, because when you're so focused with keeping people healthy now, and you're getting that huge demand that we were talking about, the preventative care kind of gets pushed to the side, and that needs to be more of a forefront. As far as taxation, individuals and payroll are taxed at a higher rate to compensate the healthcare costs. So a lot of people have issues with keeping up with the taxation rates, which is, that makes sense. Financial consequences of allowing multiple physician visits without decisions being made. That's an issue just because, the larger the population gets, the more people go back and forth to physicians, the harder it's going to be to compensate that trend. The weaknesses of the American system, there's quite a few. Limited control of who you see in most cases. Even if you purchase a private insurance in the United States, most of the time you have a network, and you can't go beyond that network, which is kind of foreign to other countries. When, I would say citizens come to the United States, they're shocked that they can only see a certain amount of people, or physicians or specialists. Affordable Care Act pushes. That's a negative and a positive because we're attempting to see more people, but it's much harder, or people struggle with obtaining the insurance for the full year because they're afraid of being hit with the tax at the end of the year if they don't comply with holding an insurance. Healthcare is not for everyone because not everyone can afford the healthcare. Little regulation on the private sector. That's a big one because prescription drugs are through the roof. And we really have a hard time regulating it unless there's a product similar to that product, or unless it gets taken to court and bring it down. Employment coverages, dependents. A lot of people hold insurance through their job place, and that's very difficult, again, because if you're terminated, you lose your job. If you're laid off, you lose that coverage, and alternatives such as COBRA are very, very high per month, and most people can't sustain that trend, I would say. Higher administration costs because of how large our private sector is, because of how many private hospitals we have. our administration costs are much higher than France's. So what? To conclude, we must use comparisons to propel our systems forward. France can learn through us, we can learn through France. So what we must do is we must study each other's trends, our statistics, and see what's going on. Which one is better? I wouldn't say one is better over the other. As far as effectiveness, France has been more effective so far. Each simply caters to a different purpose, population, and identifies with different values. We must control the private sector's power in future to correct the financial implications in the United States. America's current system is an action-oriented marketplace with prices that reflect that. So we almost, we need to recognize that as well. With great power comes great responsibility. France is a system that is pushing to provide an overall better patient experience, and that's by putting the patient first. So they're trying to cut as many unnecessary costs as possible to propel that healthcare sector. And then the last thing would just be creating better technologies, stronger medicines, and using extensive knowledge to further our efforts. I want to go ahead and thank you guys for your time, and have a wonderful day.